The night my parents drove away and left me standing in the rain, I was 15 years old, soaking wet, and completely alone on a road I had never walked before. I want you to sit with that image for a moment. A 15-year-old girl. No phone, no money, no shelter. Just the sound of their car disappearing around the bend, and the rain hitting the asphalt so hard it sounded like applause, like the world was celebrating my abandonment. My name is Clara Whitfield, and what I am about to tell you is not a story about anger. It is not a story about revenge, though parts of it will feel that way. This is a story about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally place a condition on that love, and that condition is your silence. This is a story about a lie my sister told, about hands that shook 23 years later when the truth finally walked through a door, and about the woman, the stranger, who stepped out of that storm and changed everything I believed about what it means to be saved. But to understand any of that, I have to take you back to the beginning. Not the night of the storm. Before that. Back to the house where I grew up, where the walls already knew the shape of my sister's lies long before I did. We lived in a medium-sized town in rural Virginia called Millhaven. The kind of town where everybody knows your family name before they know your face, where the church on Sunday doubles as the town newspaper, and where reputation is the only currency that actually matters. My father, Gerald Whitfield, was a respected man. He ran a small but profitable lumber business that his own father had built, and he carried that legacy the way some men carry their faith, quietly, but with absolute devotion. He was not a warm man. He was not the kind of father who knelt down to your eye level and asked you how you were feeling, but he was consistent. He was principled. And for most of my childhood, I believed that consistency was its own kind of love. My mother, Renata, was softer in presentation, but harder in judgment. She had a way of making you feel seen and evaluated at the same time, like she was always measuring you against some internal standard she had never written down, but expected you to meet. She loved her daughters, I believe that even now, but she loved them differently. And the difference between how she loved my sister and how she loved me was something I felt before I had words for it. My sister's name was Lydia. Lydia was 3 years older than me, which made her 18 the summer everything fell apart. She was beautiful in the way that makes people forgive you for things before you have even done them. Golden hair, easy smile, the kind of laugh that made adults feel like they were interesting. She was my parents' first child, their proof of success, the one whose bedroom had the bigger window and whose mistakes were always reframed as misunderstandings. I loved Lydia. I want to be clear about that. For most of my life, I genuinely, completely loved my sister. I defended her to kids at school who called her stuck up. I covered for her when she came home late. I kept her secrets the way younger sisters do, not because we were asked to, but because we believe that love means absorbing the parts of someone that the world might not accept. I kept her secrets until she told one about me. The summer I turned 15, something shifted in our house. Lydia had been accepted to a university 3 states away, a full scholarship, the kind of achievement my parents announced at every dinner for weeks. There was a celebration, there was a cake, there were phone calls to relatives whose names I barely knew, and there was me, sitting at the edge of all of it, happy for her, not yet knowing that her departure had set something in motion. That August, 6 weeks before Lydia was supposed to leave, my mother's pearl necklace went missing. This was not a small thing. The necklace had belonged to my grandmother. It was a single strand of 22 pearls, worth somewhere around $4,000 at the time, but worth infinitely more in emotional terms. My mother wore it on every significant occasion. It was kept in a small velvet box in her top dresser drawer, a drawer that was, and I say this precisely, never locked, because my mother trusted us. When the necklace disappeared, the house changed temperature. My mother searched for 2 days before she said anything out loud. I watched her move through the rooms with that particular stillness that means someone is trying to stay calm while everything inside them is not calm at all. On the 3rd day, she gathered us in the living room, me and Lydia, and she asked, simply and directly, if either of us knew where the necklace was. I said no, because I did not know. Lydia said no, and she looked at me when she said it. I did not understand that look at the time. I filed it away the way you file things that confuse you, somewhere in the back, assuming you will understand it later. Later came 2 days after that. My mother found me in my room and sat on the edge of my bed in a way she had not sat since I was small and sick with fever. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said, very carefully, that Lydia had told her something. That Lydia had seen me going through her dresser. That Lydia had not wanted to say anything but felt she had to because the necklace was too important. I remember the exact feeling in my chest when she said those words. It was not anger, not immediately. It was confusion. A deep, disorienting confusion, the kind that makes you question your own memory. Had I gone near the dresser? No, I knew I had not. But why would Lydia say that? What would she gain? I told my mother the truth. I had not touched the necklace. I had not gone near the dresser. I did not know where it was. My mother looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something that I have carried inside me for 23 years, like a splinter that never fully healed. She said, "Lydia has no reason to lie about this, Clara." My father's response was worse, not because it was louder, but because it was quieter. He stopped meeting my eyes at dinner. He responded to my questions with single syllables. He moved through the house like I had become a problem he did not know how to solve, and had decided, for now, to simply not address. I was grounded, not officially, not with a declared punishment, but in the way that matters more, socially, emotionally, quietly excluded from the warmth of the family while Lydia continued to exist in the sunlight of their approval. I kept telling the truth. Every time someone gave me an opening, I said, "I did not take it. I do not know where it is. Please believe me." Nobody believed me. And then the necklace was found. Not by me, not by my parents. It was found by our housekeeper, Mrs. Alderton, a stout, quiet woman who had worked for our family for 11 years, and who I think understood more about our household dynamics than any of us gave her credit for. She found it in a coat pocket, specifically in the pocket of Lydia's winter coat, which had been hanging in the hallway closet since February. The room went very still when Mrs. Alderton carried it in, held out in her palm like an offering. My mother stared at it. My father set down his coffee cup very slowly. And Lydia said it must have fallen in there by accident, that she must have picked it up without thinking, perhaps meaning to put it back and forgetting. My parents accepted this explanation. Not immediately. There was a conversation, a closed-door discussion I was not part of, but within 48 hours, the household had quietly rearranged itself around Lydia's explanation and moved on. The necklace was back in its velvet box. Lydia's departure for university was 2 weeks away, and everyone was focused on that. The apology I received was 4 words. My mother, passing me in the hallway, said, "We're sorry, Clara. All right?" No specifics. No acknowledgement of what had been said or assumed or taken from me. No reckoning with the fact that my sister had pointed at me and let our entire family believe I was a thief. 4 words. And then she kept walking. I stood in that hallway for a long time after she disappeared around the corner. Something settled in me that day. Not bitterness. Not yet. Something quieter than that. A decision, made below the level of conscious thought, that I was on my own in this house. That the protection I had believed existed, the invisible guarantee that comes with being someone's daughter, was thinner than I had thought. Maybe thin enough to disappear entirely. I was right about that. I just did not know how quickly it would be proven. Lydia left for university on a Thursday in early September. The send-off was significant. packed car, tearful hugs, my mother pressing a card into Lydia's hand that I caught a glimpse of, thick with cash. My father shook Lydia's hand first, then pulled her into a hug, the kind of physical affection he rationed so carefully that receiving it felt like an event. I hugged her too. I hugged my sister, and she hugged me back, and she smelled like the vanilla shampoo she had used since we were children. And for a moment, just one moment, I forgot everything and was simply sad to see her go. Then she got in the car and left. The house was quieter after that. My parents moved through it carefully, like people learning to navigate a space that had been rearranged. I started my sophomore year of high school 2 days later and buried myself in schoolwork, which had always been the one place where I felt genuinely competent, genuinely seen. For a few weeks, things were almost calm. Then Lydia called home. I was not on the call. I never was in those early weeks. Lydia called the house phone and spoke to my parents, and what was said stayed between them. I would sometimes hear my mother's laughter floating from the kitchen, or catch my father's voice dropping into that particular register he only used when he was proud of someone. But one Saturday evening in October, I walked past the living room and my mother was on the phone and her face was different. Not distressed exactly, but tightened, concentrated. The way she looked when she was processing something she had not expected. After the call, she found my father in his study. The door closed. I went to my room and tried to concentrate on homework, and failed completely. That night at dinner, the air had changed. My parents were polite. They asked about school, they passed the bread. But there was something underneath all of it. Some conversation that had happened that I was not part of, and that was, I could feel it, about me. 3 days later, on a Tuesday, my father came to my room after dinner and sat in the chair by my desk the way he almost never did. He said that Lydia had told them something. Again, those words. Lydia had told them something. He said that Lydia was concerned, that at university she had been talking to a counselor, processing some things from her childhood, and that she had shared something she had apparently been holding on to for a long time. Something about me. He said, and I need you to understand that I am giving you his exact words as closely as I can remember them. He said that Lydia had told the counselor that I had a problem with honesty, that I had a pattern of taking things and lying about them, that the incident with the necklace was not the first time, that there had been other things, smaller things, over the years that Lydia had never told our parents about because she had wanted to protect me. I sat very still while he said all of this. When he finished, I asked him one question. I said, "Do you believe her?" He was quiet for a moment, and then he said that he did not know what to believe, but that Lydia had no reason to lie, that she was seeing a counselor and working through difficult things, and it would not make sense for her to invent something like this. I said, "She invented the necklace." He said that was different. That was a misunderstanding. I said, "Dad, she told Mom I stole the necklace. It was in her coat. That is not a misunderstanding." He stood up then. He said we would talk more about it when everyone had had time to think. And he left my room. We did not talk more about it. Not that week, not the week after. What happened instead was a gradual, quiet withdrawal. The kind of family Cold War that leaves no evidence, no shouting, no declared positions, just a steady erosion of warmth, inclusion, and trust. My mother stopped asking about my day. My father started working later. The dinner table conversations became transactional, logistical, empty of the small kindnesses that had held us together even in the difficult years. I was 15 years old and I was being tried in a court where the only witness was the person who had already lied once, and the judges had already decided the verdict. I told myself I would survive it. I told myself things would improve. I focused on school. I found a corner of the library where I could sit and read for hours and feel, briefly, like I existed in a world that was fair. And then came the night of the storm. It was November. Cold the way Virginia gets cold in November. Not dramatic, not snowing, just that damp, penetrating gray that gets into your bones. I had gone with my parents to a fundraiser dinner at the community center for my father's business association. One of those events I was brought to not because my presence was wanted, but because my absence would have required explanation. I sat through 2 hours of speeches and rubber chicken and adult conversation I was not part of. And then, on the drive home, something happened that I did not see coming, even after everything. A phone call came through the car speakers. Lydia. She was calling from university, and from the first word she said, I could hear that she had been crying. She said, and I will tell you what she told them, not what was true, because at that point, I did not yet know where the truth ended and the lie began. She said that I had sent her a message, that I had contacted her and said things that frightened her. Threatening things. Things about the necklace, about her leaving, about what I was going to do to her reputation if she didn't tell the truth. She said she was scared of me. My parents pulled the car over. I said, calmly, because I was so stunned that calm was the only thing available to me. I said that I had not sent her any message, that I did not have her university contact details, that my phone was right there in my pocket and they were welcome to look at it. My father took my phone. He looked through it. There were no messages to Lydia. He knew there were no messages. He could see there were no messages. And then he said something I still cannot fully explain. He said, "You could have deleted them." The rain started then. Not a light rain. The kind that immediately overwhelms the wipers and makes the road ahead almost invisible. My mother said something to him in a low voice. He responded. I could not hear the words, only the tone. That adult tone that means the decision has already been made and the conversation is just the formal paperwork. My father turned around and looked at me in the back seat. He said that they needed me to get out of the car. I thought at first that I had misunderstood. He said it again. He said they needed space, that things were too heated, that I should walk the rest of the way, and we would all talk calmly when I got home. I said, "It's raining." He said he could see that. I said, "We're 3 miles from home." He said the walk would do me good, that I needed to think about the choices I was making. My mother did not turn around. She was looking at her hands in her lap. I got out of the car. The door closed behind me and the car pulled away, and within 30 seconds the red taillights had disappeared completely into the curtain of rain. I stood on the side of that road and I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. People expect that a 15-year-old girl abandoned in a storm by her parents would collapse into tears immediately. But I did not cry. What I felt was something older than crying, something that sat in the chest like a stone, heavy, permanent, final. I had no phone. My father had kept it. I had no money. I had worn my good dress to the dinner, the one with no pockets, because my mother had told me to look presentable. I had no coat. I had left it in the car. The rain was the kind that soaks you completely within the first 60 seconds. By the time I started walking, I was already shaking. Not from fear, not yet, but from cold. That immediate, bone-deep cold that makes your body feel like it belongs to someone else. I knew the road. I had driven it 100 times. It ran along the edge of what people in Millhaven called the Old Creek Woods, a stretch of trees that in daylight was beautiful and unremarkable, and in the dark and rain felt like something from a story told to frightened children. The road had no street lights for the first mile and a half. It had no sidewalk, just asphalt and gravel shoulder, and the sound of water moving through the trees. I walked. I told myself to count steps. When counting felt too slow, I counted the white line markers on the road. When the rain got heavy enough that I could barely see them, I just walked and breathed and held on to the one thought that kept me moving forward. I had not done anything wrong. Whatever happened tonight, whatever came next, I had not done anything wrong. I had gone maybe 3/4 of a mile when I saw the light. Not a car. The light was still and golden, coming from somewhere slightly off the road. As I got closer, I could see it was a house. Small, set back from the road by a long gravel driveway, with a covered porch and a single lamp burning in the front window. The kind of house that looks like it has been in the same family for generations, weathered but solid, rooted into the land around it. I stood at the end of the driveway for a long time. I was 15, and I had been raised to be cautious, to not knock on strangers' doors, to not ask for help in ways that might embarrass the family. I stood in the rain and had an actual internal debate about whether walking up that driveway was safe or appropriate, which tells you something about how deeply those instructions had been installed in me. That even alone and soaking and shaking with cold, my first instinct was to worry about what it would look like. Then a crack of thunder came, so close it felt like it split the air directly above me, and that settled the argument. I walked up the driveway and knocked on the door. The woman who opened it was somewhere in her 60s. Not elderly, vigorous actually, with sharp dark eyes and silver hair pulled back practically. She was wearing a heavy cardigan and holding a mug of something hot, and she looked at me standing on her porch, soaking wet and shaking, with an expression that was not alarm or suspicion, but something more direct than either of those things. She looked at me the way a person looks when they see a problem and immediately begin calculating how to solve it. She said, "Get inside." Not a question. Not even particularly gentle. Just a clear, immediate instruction delivered by someone who had made a decision in under 3 seconds and had no interest in debating it. I got inside. Her name was Margaret Osei. She told me this while handing me a towel from the hallway closet and pointing me toward the bathroom to change into dry clothes. A pair of her own sweatpants and a wool sweater that came down to my knees. She told me to put my wet things on the rack by the heater. She told me to come to the kitchen when I was done. There was no interrogation, no alarm, just a set of practical instructions delivered with the calm authority of someone who had handled difficult situations before and found that clarity was more useful than comfort. When I came to the kitchen, there was soup on the stove, hot chocolate on the table, and Margaret Osei sitting across from the empty chair, waiting. She said, "Tell me what happened. Start from wherever makes sense." So I did. I told her everything. Not the edited version, not the version I had been presenting to teachers and school counselors, who I sensed were not truly equipped to hold what I was carrying. I told her the real version. The necklace, the lie, my parents' withdrawal, Lydia's phone call, the rain, the car pulling away. I told her about my father's face when he told me to get out, about my mother's hands in her lap, about the specific, terrible detail of him keeping my phone. Margaret listened without interrupting. She did not fill silences with reassurances. She did not make the small noises of sympathy that people make when they are performing attentiveness rather than actually practicing it. She just listened. And her listening was so complete and so still that something in me that had been clenched for months began, very slowly, to open. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long has your sister been doing this?" Not, "Are you sure that's what happened?" Not, "Perhaps there's another explanation." Not, "Lydia has no reason to lie." She went straight to the pattern. She had heard one story, and she already understood that this was not the first time. That it had a shape, a repetition, a logic. I said I thought it had been happening for a long time, maybe always. In smaller ways, ones I hadn't recognized as a pattern until now. She nodded like I had confirmed something she had already suspected. She said, "Girls like your sister, they don't start with big lies. They practice on small ones. They learn who believes them and who asks questions, and they stay away from the people who ask questions. The fact that it took a necklace being found in her coat for your parents to have even a moment of doubt, that tells me they have been trained for a long time. I stared at her. She said, "That doesn't excuse them. I want to be clear. What they did tonight is not something you excuse, but it helps to understand the mechanism. It helps you stop blaming yourself for not being able to break through it." I said, "Why do you understand this so well?" She looked at me over her mug for a moment. Then she said, "Because I was you. A very long time ago in a different house. I was exactly you." Margaret Osei called my parents that night, not to report that I was safe, though she did that, firmly and without apology, but to tell them she was keeping me until morning because the roads were dangerous, and a child should not be walking them alone in a storm. My father tried to say something in response, and she spoke over him with the particular authority of a woman who has decided she is done being interrupted, and that was the end of that conversation. She made up the spare room for me, clean sheets that smelled like lavender and cedar, a glass of water on the nightstand, a small lamp left on because, she said, she always left a light on for guests. I lay in that bed and listened to the rain on the roof and felt something I had not felt in months. Not happiness. It was too complicated a night for happiness. But safety. A temporary, borrowed safety. The kind that comes from being in a space where someone has looked at you clearly and decided you are worth protecting. I slept for 9 hours without waking. In the morning, Margaret made breakfast. Eggs, toast, strong tea. And we sat at her kitchen table while the storm finished and the sky turned that pale, washed-out blue that follows heavy rain. The world outside her window looked clean in a way it hadn't the night before. She asked me about school. Not in the polite, surface way adults usually asked. She asked specifically. What subjects? What I was good at? What I wanted to do? She asked about books I had read. She pushed back on 2 of my opinions about things and then told me she liked how I argued, that I argued with evidence and not just feeling. When my father arrived to collect me, not my mother, just my father, which itself said something, Margaret answered the door and spoke to him for a long time on the porch while I waited in the hallway. I could not hear everything. I heard phrases. She was alone in the rain, and a 15-year-old, and regardless of what you believe happened, and one phrase that came through very clearly. You owe this child an explanation, not the other way around. When my father came inside, he looked different than he had the night before. Not broken. My father was not a man who broke easily, but quieter. A quietness that was different from his usual quietness. Like something had shifted slightly in the internal arrangement of things. He looked at me and said, "Let's go home." That was all. I thanked Margaret. She pressed a small card into my hand. Just her name and a phone number, written in precise, small handwriting. She said to call if I needed anything. She said it the way people say things when they mean them, not as a social formula. I kept that card. The drive home was silent, not the hostile silence of the night before, a different kind. The silence of 2 people who are aware that something has changed and are not yet sure how to speak inside the new shape of things. My father did not apologize that day. He did not apologize that week. What he did instead was make small adjustments, being home for dinner, asking brief questions about school, passing the bread without being asked. Tiny, cautious signals that the temperature was shifting. My mother was harder to read. She was polite, she was present, but there was something careful in how she moved around me, like she was still deciding what to do with what she knew, what had been found in that coat pocket, what Margaret Osei had apparently said on that porch, and until she decided, she would maintain careful neutrality. Lydia called twice that week. Both times I was aware of my parents retreating to other rooms to take the calls. Both times the calls lasted a long time. I did not ask what was said. I had decided, in that spare room with the lavender-smelling sheets, that I was done asking for information that people were choosing not to give me. If they wanted me to know something, they would tell me. If they didn't, the absence of information was itself information. I went to school. I read. I called Margaret from the school payphone, because my phone had been returned to me silently, placed on my desk one morning like it had never been taken, just to say thank you again. She said not to thank her.
She said to keep her number.
She said, things like this have a way of taking a long time to resolve. Don't be impatient with the timeline. I wrote that down. Don't be impatient with the timeline. I kept it in my journal, which I had started keeping the week after the storm. Not because I thought anyone would ever read it, but because writing things down made them feel less like they were dissolving in the air. Made them feel documented, real. That instinct, to document, to record, to keep evidence of what had actually happened, would turn out to be one of the most important habits I ever developed. Lydia came home for Thanksgiving. The house prepared for her arrival the way a stage prepares for the lead actor. My mother cooked for 2 days. My father arranged his schedule. The guest room, which was technically my room's equivalent on the other side of the house, was freshened and prepared. I set the table. I helped cook. I told myself that I would be civil, that I would not create conflict, that I would simply observe. Lydia arrived on Wednesday afternoon looking polished and confident and slightly more adult than she had been in September, the way university does to people in the first semester. She hugged my parents. She exclaimed over the house. She said I looked taller, which was not true, and was the kind of observation people make when they are performing affection without wanting to actually connect. At dinner, she talked about university, the classes, the new friends, the professor who had noticed her writing, the opportunities. My parents listened with the full, warm attention they gave her automatically, the attention I had spent years trying to earn through achievement. She did not mention the phone call in the car. She did not mention Millhaven Road, or November rain, or what she had told the counselor. She talked about her English literature class and a coffee shop near campus that she had made her regular writing spot. And I sat across from her and smiled when it was appropriate, and passed dishes when asked, and said almost nothing, because I had decided that nothing I said at that table would change anything. And sometimes, silence is not defeat. Sometimes it is patience with a very long timeline. After dinner, when my parents were in the kitchen, Lydia found me on the back porch. She sat in the chair beside me without asking. We looked at the backyard for a moment. November bare. The garden my mother kept in summer reduced to its brown winter skeleton. Then Lydia said, I know you're angry. I said, I'm not. She said, you should be. I turned to look at her then, and I saw something on her face I had not expected. Something small and unguarded that her university polish had not yet fully covered. Something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, like it was costing her something to be here, on this porch, saying this. She said, the counselor asked me to think about patterns, about things I had done that I wasn't proud of. I waited. She said, the necklace wasn't an accident. The night was very quiet around us. She said, I needed Mom and Dad focused on something else that summer. I was scared about leaving. I thought if there was a problem to manage, they wouldn't, I don't know, notice how scared I was, or ask me questions I didn't know how to answer. She stopped. I said, so you pointed at me. She didn't deny it. I said, and the phone call in the car. Lydia, you told them I threatened you. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she was not going to answer. Then she said, I thought if they were managing a crisis with you, they wouldn't notice that I was struggling, that I had been struggling for a while, that university was terrifying and I didn't know how to ask them to let me be terrified without disappointing them. It was the most honest thing my sister had ever said to me. I sat with it for a while, turned it over, looked at it from different angles the way you look at something that has been handed to you and you are not yet sure if it is a gift or a trap. Then I said, "That is a real explanation, Lydia. I'm not saying it isn't. But it isn't an excuse. And an explanation isn't the same as an apology." She looked at me. Then she nodded once. She said, "I know." She went inside after that. She did not apologize, not that night. But something had shifted, some first fragile movement of a thing that had been completely frozen. I stayed on the porch for another hour in the cold, watching the bare garden and thinking about Margaret Osei's words. Don't be impatient with the timeline. The years that followed were not a clean resolution. I want to be honest about that because I think stories that move too quickly from wound to healing do a disservice to everyone who has lived through something that did not heal cleanly or quickly. My parents and I found a kind of careful peace in the years between that Thanksgiving and my leaving for university at 18. My father, slowly, began to show up differently. Not transformed, not suddenly expressive, but more deliberate in the small ways. He attended more of my school events than before. He asked real questions. Once, driving me to a debate competition, he said, unprompted, that he thought he had been unfair to me. Just that. No elaboration, but he said it, and he meant it, and I received it for what it was. Not enough, but something real. My mother took longer. She was a woman who dealt with her own guilt by becoming slightly more generous in other ways, cooking my favorites, making small gestures of recognition. She never said directly that she had been wrong, but she stopped reflexively defending Lydia in my presence, which for her was significant movement. Lydia and I built something over those years that I would not call closeness, not the uncomplicated closeness of early childhood, but something more durable, an honesty, a habit of saying difficult things directly. She continued with her counselor. She called me sometimes, separately from my parents, to talk. She told me once that understanding what she had done was the most uncomfortable work she had ever done on herself. I believed her. I left for university in the fall of my 18th year. I studied law. This surprises nobody who has heard this story, I suspect. A girl who spent her adolescence watching truth be manipulated and justice be delayed tends to develop strong opinions about systems that are supposed to prevent that. I graduated. I built a practice in estate and family law, cases involving wills, trusts, contested inheritances, documents signed under pressure. Cases where someone needed a person in their corner who understood, at a cellular level, what it felt like to have your truth dismissed by the people with power. I was good at it, better than good. I thought about Margaret Osei often over those years. I had called her from university a handful of times. Brief calls, update calls, the kind you make to people who have mattered to you and to whom you want to say, without saying it directly, I am still here. What you did that night mattered. She was always warm and direct, and not particularly sentimental about it. She asked about my studies. She pushed back on my ideas. She treated me not like a wounded bird she had rescued, but like a person whose opinions were worth engaging with, which was exactly what I had needed from her from the very beginning. And then, 12 years after the night in the storm, she called me. She was 74. She had been diagnosed with a condition that affected her mobility and increasingly her ability to manage her affairs independently. She had no children. Her late husband had died 7 years prior. She had a small network of friends, a lawyer she had used for decades, and a house and a piece of land that she had been trying, for several years, to ensure would be handled correctly after her death. She said she had been going through her documents, that her current lawyer had retired, that she needed someone she trusted to help her get her affairs in order, that she had followed my career enough to know what I did, and that she was calling me not because I owed her anything. She was very specific about this, but because she trusted my judgment and wanted someone with clean motives in her corner. I drove to Millhaven that weekend, sitting across from her at the same kitchen table where she had given me hot chocolate and soup 23 years earlier. I understood something I had not fully understood before. The night she had opened her door to me, it had not been an accident or a coincidence or a random act of generosity. Margaret Osei was a woman who had spent her life opening doors to people who had been left in storms. It was not impulse, it was character. Deep, practiced, deliberate character. We spent 3 hours going through her documents. Her will was simple and clean. The land, she wanted to go to a land trust for conservation. The house, to a specific young family she had befriended, a couple who had recently lost their home and who she had been quietly helping for the past 2 years, in the way she helped people, practically, without announcement. She wanted everything documented properly, witnessed, filed, uncontestable. I made sure of it. I was at her house one afternoon, reviewing the final documents, when my father called. He called my personal number, which he rarely did during work hours. His voice was strange, controlled in the way of someone managing a strong feeling very carefully. He said he had been going through some boxes, old boxes, from the attic, and he had found something. He found my journal, the one I had started the week after the storm. The one I had filled over 3 years with the careful documentation of every conversation, every incident, every moment of the long, slow, complicated truth of what had happened in our family. He had not meant to read it. He had opened it thinking it was an old school notebook. And then he had read it. All of it. He said, "Clara," and then he stopped. I waited. He said, "I owe you more than I have ever given you, and I don't know if you can forgive me. But I need you to know that I understand now, completely and clearly, what I failed to do. And reading your words, reading what you went through while we looked the other way, my hands are shaking, Clara. I'm sitting here and my hands will not stop shaking." I did not cry on that phone call. I have thought about this since. Why not? Why the tears didn't come in the moment? And I think it is because the version of me that had most needed to hear those words was 15 and standing in the rain. And she was too far back in time for a phone call to fully reach her. What the phone call reached was the 38-year-old woman I had become, and she received it with something that was not tears but was perhaps more complicated. A deep, settling recognition that the truth, kept carefully and documented honestly, had found its way into the light without her having to force it there. I said, "I know you're sorry, Dad." He said, "I need to say it properly. In person." I said, "Okay." I told him I was in Millhaven, at Margaret Osei's house, the woman who had brought me in from the storm that night. He was quiet when I said her name. A long, waited quiet. Then he said he would like to come, if that was all right. He said he would like to thank her properly, if she was willing. He said, "The person who picked up what I dropped. She deserves to hear it from me, that I know what she did." I asked Margaret. She said, with characteristic directness, "Tell him to come for lunch. I'll make soup." My father drove to Millhaven the next day. He was 67 years old, and his hair had gone fully silver, and he walked slightly more carefully than he used to, but he was still recognizably himself. Contained, principled, the kind of man who straightened his jacket before knocking on a door. He knocked on Margaret's door, and she answered, and they looked at each other for a moment. Then my father said, "You took care of my daughter when I didn't. I am here to thank you for that, and to acknowledge that what you did for her was something I should have done, and failed to. Margaret looked at him for a long moment with those sharp, steady eyes. Then she said, "Come in. The soup is ready." We sat at that kitchen table, the three of us, and we ate, and we talked, and my father's hands shook slightly through the first part of the meal, and then steadied as the afternoon went on. He asked Margaret about herself, genuinely, the way he asked questions when he was truly interested, and she answered directly, and somewhere across the middle of that lunch, something moved between them that I did not have a word for. Not forgiveness exactly. That was between my father and me, and it was a longer road than one afternoon. Not resolution. Something more like recognition. The acknowledgement, by all three of us, of what that night had caused and what it had built. The strange, impossible arithmetic of a storm that had taken something and given something else back in its place. I finished Margaret's documents that week. They were filed correctly, witnessed properly, completely sound. When I handed her the final copies, she held them for a moment with the same expression she'd had the night she'd handed me a towel. Practical, satisfied. A problem assessed and handled. She said, "Thank you, Clara." I said, "You started this a long time ago on a rainy night when you opened a door." She said, "You knocked. That matters too. A lot of people wouldn't have knocked." I thought about the 15-year-old girl standing at the end of the driveway in the rain, debating whether to ask for help, worrying about what it would look like. I said, "It was a very loud thunderclap." She laughed. A real laugh, sudden and warm. And for a moment she looked exactly the same as she had the night I had met her. Sharp eyes, cardigan, mug of something hot. And the years between that night and this one collapsed briefly, and I could see the whole arc of it. The storm, the door, the soup, the journal, the law degree, the documents, my father's shaking hands, this kitchen, this table, this afternoon. My name is Clara Whitfield. I am 38 years old. I am a family law attorney who specializes in making sure that people's truths are properly documented and protected and impossible to dismiss. My sister and I speak every few weeks. It is honest and occasionally difficult and real in a way our childhood conversations never were. My father and I have dinner every month. He asks real questions. He listens to the answers. My mother passed 4 years ago, peacefully, a long illness, surrounded by family. In her final weeks, she held my hand and said, "I am sorry I didn't fight harder for you." I told her I knew. I told her I loved her. Both things were true at the same time, which is how love actually works. Not clean, not simple, but real. And Margaret Osei is 81 years old and still in that house with the lamp in the window and the soup on the stove, still opening doors to people who knock in the rain. I call her every week. I always will. The lesson I carry from all of this is not about betrayal, though betrayal was the beginning. It is not about justice, though justice, slow and imperfect, eventually came. The lesson I carry is about documentation, about keeping your own record of the truth, even when nobody is asking to see it. About the radical act of trusting your own memory when everyone around you is asking you to revise it. And about the thunderclaps, the moments of crisis that feel like pure loss, but are also, if you can survive them, invitations to walk up a driveway you would not otherwise have approached. Keep your truth. Document it. Be patient with the timeline. And if you ever find yourself standing in the rain, please knock on the door. This has been a Quiet Desk Stories original. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.